In a desolate shantytown, a 13-year-old girl named Amara dropped out of school to scavenge for trash and tend to her ill mother. One fateful evening, she stumbled upon an abandoned baby girl and, against all odds, made the bold decision to care for her. Despite the scorn from her neighbors, Amara and the child clung to each other through poverty and hardship. Then, a billionaire named Hugo Matthews, recognizing the baby as his long-lost daughter, changed their world forever. The following is their story. Amara teetered on a fragile wooden plank, which was the only bridge connecting her shack to the rest of the slum. Her feet were cold, slick with the grime of the river below. At just 13 years old, her slender frame bore the weight of a much older soul, one that had learned too quickly how to survive. The air was thick with the scent of rotting fish and the stagnant swamp water that surrounded their home. Flies swarmed, mosquitoes buzzed aggressively, and the night's cacophony of croaking frogs barely masked the noise of desperate lives. This was Caire, a poor neighborhood built upon floating debris in Lagos. It was where Amara had lived for as long as she could remember. Inside their shack, her mother, Mommy Amara, lay on a ragged mat, suffering from an infection caused by a wound on her leg. Weeks earlier, while out searching for plastic and metal bottles, she'd stepped on a rusty nail. The wound seemed trivial at first, but then it began to fester, and soon a fever ravaged her body. Amara had done her best, dabbing her mother's brow with cool cloths and offering whispered prayers, but the fever only grew worse. Their dire situation had a simple truth. Amara had no money for proper medicine, and medicine was something only the wealthy could afford. One evening, as Mommy Amara's fever raged, Amara made a decision. She dropped her schoolbooks on the floor and grabbed the old, sagging burlap sack her mother used to collect recyclables. It was as big as Amara's frail frame, but she didn't hesitate. "I'll go, Mommy. I'll find bottles. I'll sell them and buy your medicine," she promised, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Her mother, weak and trembling, looked at her daughter with fear in her eyes. "Amara, you're just a child," she whispered. But Amara was resolute, the fear in her heart masked by the unshakable determination in her gaze. "I'm all you have," she replied softly. That night, Amara made her way to the garbage heaps on the edge of the city. The smell of smoke and sewage stung her nostrils, and stray dogs scavenged through the refuse. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Each bottle she picked up brought her closer to the medicine that could save her mother's life. The night pressed around her, cold and unforgiving, but she kept her hands moving, working as quickly as she could. Then, amidst the smell and filth, she heard it, a cry. Soft at first, but unmistakable. A baby. Her heart lurched. Without thinking, Amara dropped the sack and followed the sound, her bare feet navigating through the trash. She found the source, a tiny bundle wrapped in a tattered cloth, half buried in garbage. Amara's hands shook as she pulled the cloth away to reveal a white baby girl, her skin almost glowing in the dim light. The child's lips trembled, and her tiny fists flailed weakly. Around her neck was a delicate silver necklace, glistening even through the grime. Amara froze. She was only 13. She had no milk, no food, and no idea how to care for this fragile life. She was struggling to keep herself alive. How could she care for a baby? But as the baby whimpered again, weak and desperate, Amara made a choice. "I won't leave you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I'll take you home." With the baby cradled in her arms, Amara walked back to her shack, leaving behind the sack full of recyclables. The winds howled as she passed through the swamp, the weight of the child against her chest reminding her of the responsibility she had just assumed. At the shack, her mother stirred at the sound of the door opening. "What is that, Amara?" she asked, her voice weak and filled with confusion. Amara lowered herself to her knees, unwrapping the scarf that held the child close. The baby let out a soft whimper, her eyes fluttering open. "I found her in the trash, Mommy. She was abandoned," Amara said softly. For a long moment, her mother was silent, her hand reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "My God," Mommy Amara whispered, her voice breaking. "A life discarded like waste." Amara nodded, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made. "I couldn't leave her there, Mommy. She would have died." Her mother looked at her, studying her face. After a long moment, she nodded weakly. "You did the right thing, Amara. You saved her life. Amara wrapped the baby in a spare blanket and sat beside her mother, watching her sleep. She was just a girl, but now, she was a mother, a protector of two lives. Days passed, and Amara continued to scavenge for bottles while caring for the baby she named Sophia. The community whispered, calling her crazy, questioning why she was raising a child so unlike herself. Some mocked her, but she ignored them. Every day, she did what she had to do, for Sophia's sake. Every day, the baby grew stronger. Every day, Amara's love for her grew deeper. But one day, as Amara walked with Sophia on her back, the unthinkable happened. A well-dressed man, walking along the same narrow path, stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the baby. His eyes went wide, and he looked at Amara as if she were some sort of ghost. The man's name was Hugo Matthews, and he had been grieving the loss of his daughter for months. His wife, Claire, had died in childbirth, and shortly after, their newborn daughter, Isabella, was kidnapped. The child was believed to have been abandoned in the slums, left to die. But here, in Amara's arms, was a child with the exact silver necklace Hugo's daughter had worn when she was taken. As Hugo stood frozen, his hands trembling, he whispered, "It can't be. Is that my daughter?" Amara stiffened, clutching Sophia tighter to her chest. She didn't understand what was happening, but the man's gaze, one filled with an unmistakable blend of hope and desperation, told her everything. She whispered softly, "Her name is Sophia." Hugo, his voice cracking, stepped closer, his eyes locked on the necklace. "That necklace? It's hers. It was my wife's. She wore it the night she died." Amara's heart raced. She didn't know who this man was, but something in his voice made her tremble with both fear and disbelief. She had no answers. She had only a promise to keep, a promise to protect this child, whom she had rescued from the trash. "Please, let me hold her," Hugo pleaded, his hands shaking. "She's mine." Amara hesitated, but, after a moment, allowed the man to gently cradle Sophia in his arms. Hugo's tears flowed freely, and Amara watched, heartache and wonder mixing within her. "You saved her," Hugo said hoarsely, looking at Amara with gratitude and awe. "You saved my daughter." As Hugo stood there, cradling Sophia, Amara realized something she had never known before. That love was not bound by blood. It was bound by action. Soon, DNA tests confirmed that Sophia was indeed Hugo's daughter. And in a twist of fate, Amara's life, once shaped by scarcity, was now linked to Hugo's wealth. Hugo moved Amara and her mother into a house far beyond anything they could have ever imagined. A place with running water, clean food, and space to breathe. Amara returned to school, and Sophia became a child of two worlds, loved by both a girl from the slums and a grieving billionaire. And so, the story of Amara, the girl who saved a life from the trash, was no longer one of hardship alone. It became a story of transformation, of love that could break all boundaries, one that would be written into the hearts of many for years to come. As Amara stepped into her new life, every moment felt surreal. The house Hugo had arranged for them was a far cry from the shacks of Caire. It had walls that didn't leak, floors that didn't creak, and windows that opened to views of lush gardens instead of the muck and murk of the slum. But amidst the opulence, Amara still felt like an outsider in this world of polished marble and shining chandeliers. The air felt different here, lighter, less suffocating, but it was also foreign to her, and she was still learning how to breathe in it. Sophia, now named Isabella in honor of her late mother, thrived in the warmth of her new home. She grew healthier with each passing day, her laughter filling the halls of the mansion. But for Amara, the transition was harder. Every day, she found herself caught between two worlds, the one she had left behind, where survival was the primary goal, and the one Hugo had brought her into, where comfort and wealth didn't erase the emotional scars they all carried. Still, there was something undeniably beautiful about watching Sophia grow. Amara had never known the joy of watching a child bloom in a safe space, free from hunger, illness, and the crushing weight of poverty. Sophia's eyes sparkled as she learned new things, how to walk, how to speak. She had been abandoned, but now she was loved with a depth that Amara could only hope to match someday. Though Amara's own world was shifting, she found solace in her growing bond with Hugo. At first, their relationship had been one of shock and disbelief, but as time passed, Hugo's gratitude turned into something more profound. He was more than just a benefactor. He became a friend, a protector, and, in many ways, a father figure to Amara. Still, there was an unspoken tension between them, a barrier built from the deep scars of grief and the sudden weight of responsibility. One afternoon, Hugo sat across from Amara at a long dining table, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Amara, I don't know what to say to you. I can never truly repay what you've done, but I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to give you a life you deserve. You and Sophia, you both are family now." Amara's throat tightened, her fingers tracing the edge of the polished wood. "I didn't save her to get something in return," she said softly, her gaze not meeting his. "I did it because I couldn't leave her behind. She was alone, and I knew what it felt like to be left behind." Her voice wavered as the weight of her past pressed on her chest. "I know," Hugo said gently, his eyes full of understanding. "But you deserve more than this. More than what you've had to endure. I promise I won't forget that." Amara looked up then, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, she saw the truth of his words. The ache in her heart softened, but it didn't go away. It couldn't. She had given so much of herself, but she still carried the scars of the past, of Makoko, of survival. She would never forget where she came from, and she didn't want to. It was part of who she was. But maybe Dr. Weston was right. Maybe it was time to start living. "All right," Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll give it a try." The weeks that followed were a blur of counseling sessions, moments of reflection, and small breakthroughs. Dr. Weston taught Amara how to heal the wounds she had buried deep inside her, to stop seeing herself as a victim of circumstance and start seeing the strength that had carried her through. Slowly, Amara began to unravel the layers of pain she had accumulated over the years. She began to understand that survival was not the end. Living, truly living, was the goal. As Amara's emotional scars began to heal, she also discovered a passion for learning. Her time at school became more than just a way to pass the days. It became a gateway to the future, a future where she was not defined by her past, but by her potential. Her grades improved, her confidence grew, and she began to make friends who saw her not as the girl who had come from the slums, but as someone who had a voice, a story, and a purpose. Meanwhile, Hugo continued to support Amara and Sophia, but he too was changing. His grief had turned into something softer, something that allowed him to open his heart to those around him. He began to volunteer at the Zuri Elena Foundation, working alongside Amara and other children who had once been forgotten. It was through this work that he found a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his wealth was not just a privilege, it was a responsibility. One evening, as Amara and Hugo sat on the veranda, watching Sophia play in the garden, Hugo turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You've grown so much, Amara. I see it in you every day. But I also know that the world isn't always kind, even when we have everything. People will always judge you by where you come from, no matter how far you rise. But you've shown me that it's not about where you start. It's about who you choose to become." Amara smiled softly, her heart full. "I know, Hugo. I've learned that. And I've learned that love can come from the most unexpected places." He nodded, his gaze lingering on Sophia as she ran through the garden, her laughter echoing in the air. "I think you've taught me more than I could ever teach you." Amara felt a swell of warmth in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole. She had lost so much, but in the process, she had found something more valuable than gold. She had found her purpose. She had found love. And in that love, there was strength. The future was no longer something she feared. It was something she embraced, not as a victim, but as a survivor, one who had learned to live. As the months passed, Amara's life transformed in ways she had never imagined. Each day felt like a delicate balancing act between the past she had left behind and the future she was slowly building. She had her moments of doubt. There were nights when the weight of her journey pressed down on her chest, and the memories of Makoko, of hunger and struggle, crept into her thoughts. But each time, she reminded herself that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. One evening, as she sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, a familiar knock echoed on the door. It was a sound that had become increasingly common since she'd moved into Hugo's world. Visitors, invitations, meetings. Her life was filled with new faces and new experiences. She stood and opened the door to find Hugo, holding a letter in his hand. His expression was both serious and hopeful. "Amara, I've been thinking about something for a while now," he began, his voice steady. "I've been approached by a few schools that offer full scholarships for children from underserved backgrounds. These institutions believe you have great potential. They want to offer you a chance to study, not just here, but abroad." Amara's heart skipped a beat. The possibility was almost too big to comprehend. A chance to study, really study, at a prestigious school? Abroad? For a moment, her mind whirled. She thought of her time in Makoko, of the children she'd seen growing up without any hope for an education. But here, in front of her, was the opportunity of a lifetime. "But I don't want to leave Sophia," Amara said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I can't imagine being so far away from her." Hugo smiled warmly, understanding the bond between the two of them. "Sophia will always be part of your life. And while you're gone, I promise she'll be in safe hands. Mine and the people who care for her. This isn't about leaving her behind. It's about creating a future where you can do even more for her, for yourself, and for others." The thought of leaving Sophia was still a weight in Amara's heart. But as she looked at Hugo, she saw the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't asking her to give up anything. He was offering her the tools to build a future that she could never have imagined before. A future where she could return, not as a girl who had struggled to survive, but as a woman who had the power to change things. Amara took a deep breath, her fingers clutching the edge of the doorframe. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. Hugo placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to be ready. But I believe in you, Amara. And I know that whatever path you choose, you'll walk it with the same strength and heart that brought you here." The days that followed were filled with preparations. Amara spoke with Dr. Weston, who helped her understand the emotional depth of this decision. "It's okay to feel torn, Amara," Dr. Weston had told her one afternoon. "You're not just walking away from your past, you're walking toward a new version of yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that." Still, the departure loomed over her like a shadow, even as the promise of a new beginning glittered ahead. The day came too quickly. Amara stood in the grand foyer of Hugo's estate, her bags packed, her heart a mix of hope and sadness. Hugo stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, a reassuring presence. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly, his voice full of tenderness. Amara nodded, her throat tight. "I think so. But I'll never forget what you've done for me, Hugo. For all of us. Sophia, Mommy Amara. None of this would have happened if you hadn't opened your heart." Hugo smiled, his own eyes glistening with emotion. "You don't have to thank me, Amara. You've earned this. You saved my daughter. You've already done more than anyone could ever ask." Amara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away, taking a deep breath. She glanced back at the house one last time. Her home now, where she had found peace and purpose. But she knew that this was only a chapter in her story, not the end. The car ride to the airport was quiet, filled with unspoken words. As the vehicle slowed to a stop in front of the terminal, Amara turned to Hugo, her gaze steady but filled with uncertainty. "I'll come back, won't I?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hugo nodded, his eyes softening. "Of course. You'll always have a place here, Amara. And Sophia will always be waiting for you, no matter where you go." Amara's heart raced as she read on. She had dreamed of giving back to her community, but now, here was a chance to not just return, but to lead, to change the very system that had once held her captive. She sat there for a moment, the weight of the letter settling over her. It felt like destiny, a new purpose, one she had always longed for but never believed she could achieve. And now, she had the opportunity to shape the future for children who had been forgotten by society, just like she once had been. Amara smiled to herself, tears brimming in her eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pride, of accomplishment, and of hope. She wasn't just a girl from the slums anymore. She was a force, a leader, and above all, a mother in every sense of the word. And this was only the beginning. Amara stood at the threshold of a new chapter, a profound sense of accomplishment and possibility filling her heart. Everything had led to this moment. The journey from Makoko, the weight of survival that had shaped her, the unwavering love she had for Sophia, and the incredible turn her life had taken with Hugo's support. She had been given opportunities she never thought possible, and now she was on the brink of giving back in ways that once seemed like distant dreams. The letter from the Zuri Elena Foundation had been a catalyst, the final push that sent her forward. It wasn't just about the prestige of the position or the recognition that came with it. It was about the lives she could impact. The chance to return to Lagos, not as someone who needed saving, but as someone who could help others like her, was everything. It was a promise she had made to herself long ago, to never forget where she came from, and to help others rise just as she had. As the days passed, Amara's thoughts remained with the children of Makoko, the ones who still struggled, the ones who had not yet found a path out of the slums. With Hugo's help and the support of the foundation, she began making plans. She would return to Lagos not as an outsider, but as a leader, a symbol of hope, and a guide for those who still fought to survive in the shadows of a city that too often overlooked them. Her return to Lagos was met with the warmth of old friends and the whispers of the community who had once doubted her. This time, the whispers weren't scornful. They were filled with admiration, even awe, at how far she had come. Amara walked through the streets of Makoko with a new strength in her step. Sophia now safely in her arms, her hand resting lightly on her back, as they both moved toward a new beginning. It wasn't just about taking the next step for herself. It was about bringing others along with her. As she prepared for her work with the foundation, Amara knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be setbacks, challenges, and moments where the weight of it all might feel too heavy. But she had learned to carry burdens, first for her mother, then for Sophia, and now she would carry the hopes and dreams of an entire community. And when the time came for her to step onto a stage, maybe not a grand stage, but one built from the ground up, where children like her once sat, unsure of what the future could hold, Amara would speak not just from the heart of someone who had survived, but from someone who had learned to thrive. This was her final beginning, her new chapter, and it was hers to write. The story of Amara was no longer about survival alone. It was about thriving. It was about love, compassion, and purpose. It was about the quiet courage that rose from the ashes of the past, forging a new future and showing that one person's light can ignite a fire in the hearts of many.